last thing here. The guys over at PFL Mike, I think you put that one on the map. Corey Anderson, Patricio Pitbull, Frady, Patchy Mix, all frustrated because they can't get matchups. Um, so PFL acquired Bellator. They were running some shows. They came out of the gate strong, champions versus champions. A few guys were defending, and then things have really fizzled in the second half of this year. Um, what are we doing here, guys? I think the guys have a point. Nolan?
Yeah, that's $1 million question is what are we doing? And I don't think anybody knows what they're doing. You know, there's been building discontent behind the scenes when it comes to PFL, when it comes to Bellator, when it comes to a lot of fighters that are put on ice. I mean, it's not just, you know, a hand select few or somebody's manager's disgruntled or whoever. Like we've seen now evidence from pretty consistently across the board from names that are big and small that things aren't, that the fighters aren't happy there. And I know in the old regime, in the old Bellator regime, things were far from perfect, right? There was a lot of shortcomings. There was, frustration. Some fighters felt like they weren't promoted enough. Some, felt like that there were some issues, right? But I think it was a lot of times more of a lack of resources, and the promotion did at times try to make things right and try to explain to them, try to at least communicate, right? Whereas now it seems like a lot of fighters don't necessarily know like when the end is in sight. They get fights booked, they are canceled. And Patricio Pitbull coming out, I talking to a lot of people behind the scenes, different teams and people in the industry. Like it seemed like, the biggest name in Bellator coming out and saying that did certainly make an impact in terms of like putting this problem on the map. No offense to Corey Anderson or Patchy Mix or Duke Rufus or anybody else that's spoken out about this, but I think that thread that came out yesterday, which was, if you look at the times that those tweets were tweeted, they were, this was a pretty big written pre-planned statement. It's almost, I think it's got over 1 million views on Twitter now. So for him, a guy that wouldn't even, like, if you were like, man, one day down the line, if you want to go to the UFC, would you? No, this is the place I want to build Bellator. I want to be a part of this. This is where, I want to show people that MMA is a sport. It's not an organization. Like he would never even say anything that would be misconstrued as being remotely negative, and he would try to turn it into building up his brand. So for him to come out, him and his people to put out that statement, I think does speak volumes to this. And it's not a good look for PFL, and this morning, to one of his points, their tweet was about some rapper that they're going to have perform at the event on Friday. So obviously that's something that was planned probably before his statement came out, but not a great look either. So I really hope they can get things together. I think for the industry, there's a lot of people that are concerned that fighters being disgruntled and not getting fights is damning for the long-term future and just having competition in the space. So it's an unfortunate situation. I hope there's some clarity soon. I hope that they announce a bunch of events for next year and we get some of these guys that are super talented too. Patchy Mix is in his prime. Corey Anderson has looked great, in his, since he left the UFC. So I just want to see these guys back. And I hope that the communication can be better. I think that's something that should probably be easy for people to fix.
Those are two of the best across any organization, because Anderson had some great success in the UFC over some big names, some guys that wore gold. And Mix, I'm convinced, is definitely one of the top bantamweights in the world, and it's just kind of wasting away. And then you think of AJ McKee, Usman Nurmagomedov. I mean, I don't know like what's going to happen here, but we do get more press releases about executives that they sign than fight bookings. Let's see here. And Shul Jubilee's gas station says fighters have some complaints about ONE FC, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because yes, what's happening here, what's happening at ONE FC, man. This is going to be a two-man show with PFL and Bellator, but PFL, I feel like, is just dropping the ball. Zach Jackson's going maybe a little far. He says PFL is going bankrupt within 6 months. Mike, what are your thoughts on this one, man? Those are some really good fighters and that aren't just flatly aren't being used, and I'm not so sure they're excited about being part of a regular season format, although PFL is yet to commit to what 2025 is going to look like.
Yeah, it's tough. This is not the press you want on your championship event week by any stretch of the imagination. I appreciate and respect the unity that we saw these three champions, right? Like as Nolan mentioned, Patricio Pitbull, the fighter with the most fights, wins, and title fight victories in the history of the Bellator brand, coming out with that type of statement on the back of fellow champions saying something, it's like, was the point you couldn't ignore it, had to put a story together, and then you're kind of digging through the history and seeing the other complaints. And it's been pretty much a year, almost to the day, since the official purchase of the Bellator brand was announced, and it hasn't been a great run. I mean, there's a lot of frustration. I think a lot of the fears of people in the industry, from fighters to managers to more, are starting to kind of be realized in this moment. So they're really going to have to do something to turn it around. You have Don Davis out there saying he's not even that big of a fan of MMA in those interviews recently, which I think rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So I don't know. It just seems like there's constant missteps, and this isn't just guys on the bottom of the roster who you can't tack on to give some fights. These are, I imagine, the names and the athletes that were part of the backbone of your desire to purchase this organization, and now you have them disgruntled and not wanting to take fights, or not wanting to be offered fights, all these different things. So I don't know. It's a tough time when you go into the year promising 8 events with 2 title fights on them each, and you deliver 5 and only 1 had 2 title fights on it. You're just serving up many reasons to be criticized. So a quick plug, because I know we're slowly wrapping up on time here. Nolan and I will talk about this more at length tomorrow on the bonfire, so tune in for that.
There you go. Mike's been dropping them episodes there. His new podcast, YouTube channel. It's both, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
Audio.
check it out. The Bonfire. All right, guys, you're right. We're running a little short on time, but I guess this is just a way to pivot to what's happening this week. There are no UFC fights, but PFL has their finals on Black Friday. It's the day after Thanksgiving here in the United States. I don't know what you call it around the world. It's just, I guess, November 29th. But remember the early start time, because they are in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Now, Nolan, maybe you can bail me out here, but I think you said 1 p.m. Eastern for the main card, and that's 10 a.m. Pacific. And then there's some PFL MENA championships going on. But then you're saying that the whole thing starts at 7:15 a.m. Eastern?
7:15 a.m. with kind of the traditional sort of showcase prelims, right? Like some names that we know of from the Bellator and PFL roster. I'm looking at it now. You got like Alfie Davis and Mansour Barnawai on there, and Jeremy Kennedy and some others. And then at 9:30, it goes to the PFL MENA, which, as Mike pointed out before we went on the air, is 4 title fights. So that's in an amateur fight. So that's a significant amount of time. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 title fights. Main card starts at 1. So it's going to be a long day for those of us that are working. I know I'll be one of those on as well. So
it'll take less time to cook your turkey on Thanksgiving than it will.
Yeah.
Hey, don't forget though, you'll get plenty of filler breaks, right, guys, with the PFL broadcast. By the way, what's better filler? PFL randomly like doing military inaugurations, like swearing people in between fights, or UFC going to Macau and at 5 a.m. rolling out a Stipe tribute from like the week before that they could have used, or maybe even before the fight, maybe give Stipe a little more promotion. They give him his grand send off in Macau. What's a better filler, guys?
Yeah. Crazy stuff, man. Hey, we got to sprint to the finish line here. What's the fight, I guess, that maybe intrigues you the most at PFL? It is their finals. 6 fighters will be champions and millionaires in 6 different divisions, not bantamweight, not middleweight, and the women are doing flyweight this year. Go ahead, Nolan. Just give me a quick button up on PFL, this event. Any thoughts you have?
Yeah, Dakota Dacheva versus Talia Santos is the one. I think she's arguably their biggest, she's probably their biggest homegrown star at this point. And she has the ability here to really confirm herself as an excellent elite fighter as well. This is her first, in her critics' eyes, they would say this is her first test fighting a former UFC title challenger who, outside of a loss to Valentina Shevchenko, who's looked pretty damn good in her career. So big fan of that one. And then, I don't know if anybody else has a different choice, but I can keep rolling. But one other guy I was going to mention was Shamil Musayev. I think he's been, in terms of excitement factor this year, has been awesome. I didn't know much about him before this year, and he's just put on significantly violent, entertaining performances with finishes. So PFL can certainly use all of that they can get.
He's the guy that kind of looked more like a regular Joe Schmo, not the mean-looking guy on the left. All right, and Dan, Tom, how about you, man? PFL, just share your thoughts. What's a fight you're looking forward to as we wrap up the show here?
I'll just shout out Brendan Loughnane, also was training out in Bangtown Muay Thai, another fighter that's been finding some success and kind of a new wind to his career, but he's facing a guy named Timur Khizriev, who is on one of the prospect columns that I did for Junkie. So I'm really interested. Of course, he's a undefeated Russian fighter at 17-0. Still taking a big test here, in my opinion, against Brendan. So I'm looking forward to that fight.
No, he was telling us, Brendan was telling us, hey, man, they've thrown a lot of these guys at me. I stop a lot of takedowns. So he's not worried one bit. How about you, Mike Bond? Your thoughts on PFL? Anything you want to discuss? I know we have to rush through this, but whatever you want to cover, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think Dakota Dacheva is the one here, right? I think it would be very, very, very good for PFL if this fight goes well for her. If she goes out there and gets held down for 5 rounds and we see she has no ground game or something, I think that's going to be real deflating to a lot of the momentum that they built behind her. So yeah, like that would be, they just need her to have an amazing highlight, and I think it would be perfect upside for the whole show. Doesn't really matter what else happens. But I guess if we're talking about, PFL, this is the company where you win your fights and you get the next opportunity and all that stuff. In theory, Denis Goltsov versus Oleg Popov should produce Francis Ngannou's next opponent. I don't know if that's actually going to be the case or what they're going to do, but when I was there in Saudi Arabia where this fight is happening, when Ngannou fought, there was some chatter this could potentially be the next opponent. In theory, it would be kind of the same road Renan Ferreira took. So we'll see if they end up going that direction. With one fight left on Francis Ngannou's contract, I imagine this would not be plan A, but at least you have a plan C or D or E or however far down you have to go to the chain.